Welcome to the Focus on Why podcast. I'm Amy Rowlandson and I ask my guests one simple question. Why? Focusing on the importance of why, I share with you the relatable, uplifting and inspiring conversations I have with people from all walks of life. This podcast will encourage you to focus on your why to enable and empower you to achieve the success you desire. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. Today on the Focus on Why podcast, I am joined by Peter Freeth. Peter, a very warm welcome to you.
Nice to see you, Amy.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And I have a thank you to Adrian Hales for the introductions.
No, it's great. I know I've known Adrian for a few years, so nice to be recommended.
Absolutely. So let's see, where should we start today? I think we'll start with the question I ask most people to start with, which is, what is it that you're up to at the moment, Peter?
Well, having moved house 4 days ago, still climbing over boxes, moving things so in a period of change in many ways, really. Obviously, we've at the time that we're recording this, we've been in and out of lockdown in the UK for a year, almost exactly a year. And I think one of the things that's happened for just about every business is the pandemic, the lockdowns, the uncertainty, the opening and closing, and so on, has accelerated change, I think, in just about every business, and that certainly happened with mine as well. So, my business was corporate learning and development, executive coaching, and I started a publishing business properly about 12 years ago, although I've been publishing for over 20 years, and obviously writing much longer than that. And I'd always had this in the back of my mind that the publishing business would be my kind of long-term plan, I suppose a retirement plan. I don't like to say that out loud because it makes me sound old, but kind of a retirement plan. And one of the things that's changed with the pandemic, obviously, is people aren't going out and, visiting other companies, and people have had much more pressing things to think about than leadership development or even executive coaching. So I'm still doing a lot of that, but online. And so the classroom stuff has gone completely. So I mentioned about moving house, and we'd been looking for a house that had a big enough room to have a training room in it, which is what we had in the old house. And then we realized we're just not going to run courses at home again. And, a lot of my old ex-students who might even be listening to this have actually said that they're really sad about that, because they loved coming to the house and the whole sort of atmosphere and the whole community that built up around that was wonderful. But, the world's changed. And, so we stopped that. We didn't bother looking for a house that had space to train anymore, and that gave us a lot more options. But what it meant is that almost everything's online now. So far more important to me now is getting a bigger office set up with more sort of dedicated space and furniture and so on for online learning. And then the second thing is the publishing side of the business, where I thought that might be something I'll be doing in its entirety, maybe 10 years from now. Actually, the publishing is now the major part of my business. So what we've experienced over the last year has definitely accelerated not only the change in how I deliver the sort of programs that I run, but also change in the nature of the business. But what they all have in common is they're all about sharing knowledge, creating and sharing knowledge. And one of the things I found, I started the publishing business properly in 2009, when you'll remember we were in the middle of another recession. And what I realized back then was when people don't have the money to go on training courses, they buy books instead. And nowadays, of course, they also tune into podcasts and watch YouTube videos and so on. So people still have that need for knowledge and that need to learn and to develop themselves, regardless of what the environment's doing. And people will find a way to do that. So that's definitely influenced what I'm doing right now. Long answer to your simple question.
So new beginnings. This hasn't been the first time, though, that you've sort of started from scratch.
I think about 3 times I've started from scratch. I've started my own business for various reasons, some economic, some personal, mostly personal, actually. I think looking back, things like recessions and pandemics and so on, they've never really gotten in the way. What they've done is caused me to change direction and to rethink what I do and figure out different things of doing. But actually, the stuff that's been most disruptive has been personal stuff. And so, yeah, restarting from scratch, starting or restarting. I think 3 times, maybe 4 times, something like that.
And you say change direction. What was the sort of instigation, or how did you approach that? Because it's not always an easy ability to do that. And I know a lot of people. I mean, I'm a midlife beginner. I'm very proud of being a midlife beginner, and I embrace those beginnings. But sometimes it's a pretty steep learning curve.
Yes, it seems like it. I think it's a steep learning curve when you're looking into it. But I think my personal feeling is that people use the lack of knowledge and that steep learning curve as an excuse. And actually, all the big things you do in life, you just do them because you want to do them. And then you figure it out as you go along. And that was very much what I did. I mean, I started my business in 2002. I think I'd probably known for getting on for 10 years that having my own business or being self-employed was inevitable. I just didn't know what I was going to do. I just became increasingly tired of working in corporate environment. And the last company that I worked for, which was in the telecoms industry, kind of did me a favor. It was the most horrible, toxic culture that I've ever seen anywhere. But that kind of did me a favor because it was so awful. It just kind of encouraged me to prepare and to do my own thing. And then I got a voluntary redundancy package, which was very helpful. But the lack of knowledge, I think we underestimate how much we know and how much we acquire and how transferable everything that we do is. I think the particularly the education system, the recruitment industry, they're all trying to focus us into more narrow pathways. You've got this qualification, so you've got to do this job. My oldest daughter had started university a couple of years back. And what we found going to the universities and going to open days was that there are courses that are so narrow now and so focused and so vocational because the pressure is on kids to leave university and immediately get a job to pay off their student loan. That there are courses that were funneling students into specific jobs. And there were even courses at some universities that was funneling students into specific employers. And, so from the age of, mid-teens, those kids have got to decide what they're going to be doing for the rest of their lives, which is ridiculous. When I was 18, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I just knew that I wanted to have fun, but I didn't know what that would look like in terms of making a living. So I think, there's a lot of pressure on people to decide to stay on one track. And like you say about that steep learning curve, I think the problem is there's always more that you don't know than you do know. There's more that you don't know about podcasting, even after you've been doing it for as long as you have. There's more that we don't know about, all of these different things. And to think, I can't do it because I don't know enough about it. Well, nobody knew about podcasting 5 years ago. And the pandemic and the lockdowns and all that have accelerated that. And you're doing more podcasts now and people coming to you for help with the podcasts that they're starting up because, what else are people going to do? They've got to do something. So people will find a way. And, it doesn't matter how steep the learning curve is. If that's your only option, if your only way forward is up, you will find a way up.
And it's interesting you say, Peter, that you knew that it was going to be inevitable, that you were going to be an entrepreneur in one way or another, but you just didn't know what you were going to do. How did you sort of you got the voluntary redundancy, but how did you then filter out what you wanted to do versus what you didn't want to do? And how did you decide that publishing and teaching and training were going to be what you went into?
I think I'd always been interested in, I don't know, to put it broadly, knowledge, the idea of creating knowledge, sharing knowledge. I can remember specific times through my life where there was a strong connection with that. I think when I was very young, very young child, one of the first things I loved to do was read. And I think people under a certain age probably wouldn't understand or appreciate this. But when I was a kid, there were only 3 TV channels. And during the daytime, there was no daytime TV. There were no talk shows. There was no, kids' TV programs. There was nothing like that at all. So what was on the TV in the daytime? Well, the channels would either close down, they'd not broadcast at all. I think on BBC Two, it was back-to-back school programs and open university programs. So if you did a distance learning course through the OU, you would get a load of books and paper in the post, and you would watch TV programs. And they were all lectures on science, geography, history, all kinds of stuff. So when my mum, and a housewife back in those days, had a full-time job, every day full-time was cleaning, washing, because there were no, there wasn't a dishwasher. There was a washing machine, but there was no tumble dryer. There was a clothesline outside. Everything took longer because everything was a manual task. So she would be occupied all day, and she'd park me in front of the TV, and I would watch open university programs at the age of like 4 onwards, I guess. So I always enjoyed that. And if I was off school or, sick, I'd love to read. I remember I had a Star Wars book, and I think I must have read it like 4 times in one day when I was off school with a cold. Because, I think a lot of people, like I say, of a certain age would say, in our day, there was nothing else to do. You'd go and play out, you'd play outside, and if it was raining, you'd sit inside and read, or you'd make stuff, or you'd find something to occupy your time. So I think there was that sort of early on, and then when it came to the time early 2000s where I thought, I've got to make this happen, and the possibility of voluntary redundancy was there. I'd learned about something called NLP, which I guess I know you know about, and I guess some of your other guests have talked about, and people are listening to this podcast, they've probably come across. But neuro-linguistic programming, which is a system for understanding how different people see the world differently, and therefore how they create interpersonal and intrapersonal conflict by that mismatch of the subjective experience of reality. And you've all been to a meeting or an event or had a conversation with somebody where 2 people come away with very different ideas of what happened and why and even what was agreed. So we know that, but it's a system for specifically identifying what those differences are and then making changes in that subjective perception so that we can operate in the world more efficiently. And I came across that back in the mid-90s. Again, when I worked in the telecoms industry, the company I worked for had an internal training school, used to run a 3-day NLP course, and it was a cult course. Everybody in the company was trying to get on this course, so huge waiting list. So I got on it, and I loved it because it answered a lot of questions that I'd had for a long time about life and relationships. And I guess the fundamental question that I suspect everybody asks themselves at some point, and I suspect the people that say, well, I don't know, I would never ask myself that question, they're probably lying. And the question is, what is wrong with me? And I think we go through life experiencing misfortune, failure, rejection, and of course, it's very what most people do is blame the outside. Well, it's your fault. You did this. You said this. You made me feel like this. But I think underneath that, there's a level of fear for everybody, which is maybe that happened because there was something wrong with me. Maybe I went to that job interview and didn't get the job because I wasn't good enough. Maybe that relationship broke down because of something I I wasn't enough in some way. And I think everybody experiences that in some way. And so I'd been kind of looking for the answer for that in psychology books and not finding any answers. I've been finding lots of names for things that were wrong with me, but I didn't find any advice on what to do with it. And I found a lot of that in the NLP course that I did, that short course. It just gave me loads of really, really simple stuff to do that was about starting to understand how different people think differently and different people see the world differently. And it was just really simple stuff that I could put into practice right away. And the last company I worked for, when I joined there, I found out they actually had a corporate NLP practice group. So I went along to that. The guy that ran that in London was leaving. He was taking voluntary redundancy as well to start his own hypnotherapy practice. So he was leaving. So I took over the group and I ran the group. And I grew that, and we were running events across the country, more than monthly, getting up to 100 people coming along to each other. It was really the heyday of NLP, when there were lots of practice groups across the country. They were all big, popular. It was a great time, really. And so when the opportunity came up to take voluntary redundancy, I thought, well, what am I going to do with myself? And I thought, well, I'll just do what I enjoy. And I thought, well, at the moment, I'm enjoying doing this. So I'll just carry on doing this. And what I actually said to myself was, I will do this for as long as I enjoy it. And when I stop enjoying it, I'll do something else. I don't know what that will be, but, I'll find out when I get there. And, I'm still here, still enjoying it, almost 20 years later. And I'm enjoying it because it changes so much, I think, because it's never been one thing, because I've always rejected or pushed back on that pressure to be one thing. And often, people just want to know, just tell me one thing that you do. What's your job title? You're a plumber, right? I get that. I understand what a plumber is. Oh, well, I'm not really a plumber. I'm more of I'm not interested. I want you to be a plumber because that's what I understand. I want you to be an electrician. I want you to be a lorry driver because I get that. I understand that job. But, a digital resource facility, I don't know what that is. I don't want to find out. People, and if you think about all the labels that we have, father, mother, brother, sister, wife, friend, and job titles, or every label that we have is relational. It's all about the relationship that it defines. It's not about what I do. So calling me, yesterday I was fixing a leaking pipe from the shower. Am I a plumber because I was fixing a leak in a pipe? Well, for the space of 10 minutes, I was a plumber, but it doesn't define who I am. And if people talked about what they really are, there's so much. And I think, there's been a lot of talk in recent years about, employers putting people in too small boxes with job description, very specific job descriptions, and not allowing people or not creating the space for people to bring their whole selves to work. And at the same time, employers saying, and employment industry bodies and professional associations saying, oh, we want to create an environment where people bring their whole selves to work. Well, okay. Well, so if there's a leaking pipe in the bathroom, do you want to fix that? Oh, no, you can't do that. Health and safety. Well, you want me to bring my whole self to work. You don't really. What you really want me to do is bring more of the bits that you want me to bring so you can get more value for what you pay me. That's what you really want. You don't really want me to bring my whole self to work. You don't want me to start, knitting or embroidery or something, because I enjoy that and it makes me feel good. So do that in your own time. So, I think I've always pushed back on that, I don't know, very, what's the word, restrictive or reductive way of labeling and defining people. Because when we're by ourselves, we don't call ourselves anything. We just me, I. So all these labels that we have, they're for other people's benefit, not ours. So sure, if you want to call me a plumber, call me a plumber. And I went through, I suppose you could call it a midlife crisis, where I had all these names for myself and what I did, and none of them really meant anything to me. And I remember one day getting a huge sheet of paper and writing them all out, and really kind of making a map of all these labels and all these, because I was trying to define myself. And I suppose I was thinking, something like, what do I put on my business card, or what do I put on my website profile, or something like that. And as I looked at this big sheet of paper with all these labels on, that was when I realized these labels are all for other people's benefit, not for mine. And that was the moment when I realized, I don't care. Other people can call me whatever they want. I'm just me. And I'll do what I want, in terms of stuff that is valuable in some way. And other people can, if other people want to call me a coach, yeah, I'm a coach. If other people want to call me a trainer, yeah, okay. Other people want to call me a publisher, yeah, fine. That's what I am to them. Then that's what I am in their world as I sit within their world, not mine.
You raised some really interesting points here, and I could go on so many different avenues right now, Peter. And the what is wrong with me question is one of those avenues. The not good enough is another avenue. The labeling need that we have from a societal point is another avenue. So there's so many different areas. I think what we'll go with is go with the first one. What is wrong with me? Now, that question, you said it's a question that a lot of people ask at some point in their life. And if they don't, then are they really being honest about whether they have asked that question or not? You said you looked in psychology books and you didn't find the answers. The NLP provided some of the answers immediately for you, or just sort of helped to alleviate the pressure of you asking that question. Do you still ask that question now?
That's an interesting question. Yes, I think so. Because I think if you don't, it's like if you're driving your car one day and your car just kind of, the engine stops and it just stalls, and you can't get the engine started. So you think, right, well, I'm a smart person. I never run out of petrol because, I would never do it because that's stupid. So I would never do that. So you call out, the breakdown service, and they're checking the engine and the engine management system and the battery and, the tires, and, they've dismantled the car's been there for a week, and various mechanics have come and say, you haven't run out of, no, I would never run out of petrol because that would be stupid. But actually all that's happened is you've run out of petrol. Probably because you are stupid, because we all are. We all push doors that are clearly marked pull. We all, put the sugar in the wrong cup. We all, we all do things. We all ask somebody the time and then ask them again 2 seconds later because we've already forgotten what they said. We all do that. We're all stupid and on autopilot a lot of the time. We all make mistakes. And I think the point of the metaphor is that if we go around thinking, well, I'm perfect, then logically, if something's going wrong in my life, it must be somebody else's fault. Who put this chair in the way? Who put this thing here? And who didn't turn this off, or who didn't turn this on, or whatever? It's all somebody else's fault. When the obvious answer is, well, it's your fault. Because if you looked everywhere else, for example, people talk in relationships, jobs, people go through a cycle of changing jobs, go through a cycle of relationships, and are never happy. Well, you can't overlook the obvious, which is it's probably you. Like the whole thing when somebody says, in a relationship, it's not you, it's me. No, it actually is you. And I think that arrogance and that unwillingness to look at yourself in that way is not a malicious thing. It's born out of fear. And it's born out of a really fundamental fear, which is I've got this sneaking suspicion that I know what's wrong with me. But if I inquire into that too much, I will find out something that's much, much worse than that. I will discover that it's true. And I don't even want to go there. And so I will not entertain even thinking about, let alone talking about, let alone having a conversation about what's wrong with me. It's also much more convenient that it's other people's fault. And people talk about in relationships, things like soulmates. I think actually most people can get along with most people when you take away the friction caused by those fears interacting with each other. And it doesn't matter how you do that, whether it's through going on a retreat or counseling or having a good friend to talk to or whatever. But if you can explore those fears and those failings without judging yourself and without being judged and without feeling the need to judge, it's a hugely powerful. But do I still ask myself what's wrong with me? Yes, but I think in a different way. I think I know much better what's wrong with me from a sort of relational perspective. And when that does kind of get in the way and cause a bit of friction, I know much quicker, much faster why I'm reacting in a certain way, or why I'm, winding myself, getting myself annoyed, and talking to myself and winding myself up. I know why I'm doing that and what triggers that much easier. So I think I ask it in a different way now. I think I ask it in the same way that I would ask, what's wrong with the washing machine? What's wrong with my computer yesterday? The sound wouldn't work when I plugged the computer back in after moving house. So thinking, well, what's wrong with it? And then thinking, okay, how do I eliminate where the problem is, and how do I pin it down, and how do I fix it? That's much more of an analytical way of thinking about it. I think I'm much more able to apply that to myself now.
So bear in mind that we have been experiencing these cyclical questions for millennia. How is it that we are still asking these same questions?
I think because there's a fundamental design flaw in human beings, that we have extremely complex sensory systems that create this very rich representation of the outside world. We can detect electromagnetic vibrations in the universe, which we call light, and we can detect very, very subtle changes in air pressure that we call sound, and we can detect changes in the excitement of the atoms in the air around us that we call temperature. We can detect all of these amazing, amazing things. We can detect chemical molecules floating around in the air, and we call that smell. And the problem is all of those sensors are pointing outwards. The only person in the world who will never see you is you. And yeah, we're talking on Zoom right now. I can see myself in the little window. It's very nice. But that isn't me. That's a distorted picture, a distorted little video thing of it's not me. If I'm looking at that thinking that's what I look like, it isn't. Because I'm not only seeing that through the distortion of the lens on the camera, I'm also seeing it through a distortion of a lifetime of looking at myself and looking in the mirror and thinking, yeah, I look all right. And then seeing myself in another mirror and thinking, oh, Jesus, I need to lose a few pounds. We see ourselves through a filter of our own perceptual distortion. Add that to the fact that our senses only point outwards. We are mostly totally unaware of the impact that we have on the world. And we could talk about that in a relational sense, the impact that we have on other people. We could talk about it in an environmental sense. You drop a crisp packet, or you throw a water bottle, or whatever. And, people say, oh, plastic's terrible. Well, somebody put it there. It didn't get there by itself. People will go down the street, oh, look at the litter, it's terrible. What people is you. That's everybody. Everybody's dropped stuff at some point. Everybody's opened the car door and let a tissue blow away and not run after it. And, everybody's contributed to it. So we look out into the world and see a world that isn't the way we like it to be and say, whose fault is that? And the answer is, well, it's yours. Because you either caused it or you didn't solve it when you could have done. And, you didn't do your, and people would say, well, I can't solve global warming by myself. Well, that's true. But then, if everybody says that, then we don't solve it. So I think that's the design flaw, is that we don't have any kind of self-facing cameras. And so we can only judge our behavior after a time delay. So you say something to somebody and you see them pull a face and you think, oh, they didn't agree with that, or they didn't like what I just said, or, I offended them in some way. In the space of a second or two, you've got some feedback. Well, then what do you do with that? Do you ignore it? because you don't want to know that you've offended somebody. So you just say, oh, they're a bit sensitive. Oh, it was touchy today. Ooh, what's wrong with them? Rather than thinking, oh, what did I just do that, how did I misread that situation or whatever? Or longer term, you buy a pot plant, you don't water it, it dies. It might take weeks before you get that feedback. The point is, if you don't do anything with the feedback, then nothing's going to change. So people talk, and I'm sure you've had lots of guests talk about, oh, if you carry on doing the same thing, you've got to expect the same results. Yes, but why? Why? It's because the feedback is giving you information to improve your decision making. If you don't use it, you'll carry on making the same decisions based on out-of-date information. If your sat nav, when you're trying to get somewhere, isn't updating your location, then the directions will be meaningless. That's obvious. We know that. But there's so much feedback available to us constantly, and we ignore most of it because we're not seeing ourselves in the relationship with the world. We're only seeing the world and what it's doing to us. And the world isn't going to change unless we do something differently.
And you talked about the toxic culture of your previous employers of the telecommunications business that you were in. And yet, actually, you also said it did you a favor. But if they hadn't have held that course, you wouldn't have been on this different direction in life, and you wouldn't have been exposed to all of the new ways of seeing these perceptions, seeing these different filters, and being aware of what else is available. So it's funny, isn't it, that in the most toxic environment, you also found a great future?
Well, they were different companies. So the company that ran the course was a fantastic company, exciting place to work, fun, great people, sociable. It was tremendous, so supportive, wonderful. And like a lot of startup companies, it grows fast and it collapses. And the writing was on the wall. And I thought, this company isn't going to be here in a year's time. And so I started looking to move, and I moved to another company, a Canadian manufacturer that was, again, possibly even better in terms of it was a company I'd wanted to work for a long time. Fantastic place to work, loads of opportunities, exciting, a lot of great people working there. And again, startup, grew, was an international market leader in a couple of different technology areas, loads of international travel, tremendously exciting time. And again, the bubble burst and that collapsed. And I'd left both of those companies about a year before they disappeared altogether, because, you start to see signs, like they start to put signs in the room with a photocopier saying, about saving paper by copying on both sides. They start, the coffee machine was free, and then they start charging for it, things like that. So you think, yeah, I can see where this is going. And that was very sad, because they were tremendous environments. And I think, it's something, these things don't last, and you've got to make the most of them. But you've also, I think it's very important not to hang on to them. And I suppose that philosophy started with my first job. So I left school in 1985, started work as an apprentice in a kind of a telecoms related company. And great job, loved it. And something scared me about it, which was, I loved the job so much that I imagined one day waking up on my retirement day and still doing the same job, and still driving the same estate car, and still going around fixing fire alarms and telephone systems and so on, and thinking, where did my life go? And the reason I thought that was because I went to a lot of people's retirement parties, and there were engineers who'd done that job for 45 years. Same job, 45 years, working in the same little district, the same little local area, same customers, same routine every day, driving the same kind of car. And they loved it. They loved that familiarity and that security. And it was a wonderful, wonderful job. And they talked about the workforce as a family. And it really was that, it was wonderful. But I saw these people who were retiring and dying within 2 weeks of their retirement date. And I'm not exaggerating. Either side, as soon as that retirement date is in sight, it was like these people didn't have any other reason to live other than their routine. They didn't know what to do with themselves. There was one guy I worked with who was fantastic, great fun, a lovely guy to be around. And he was impatient for his retirement to come up. And he got I think he'd bought a camper van, and he was building one of these sort of electronic organs I used to see at the end of the pier. And he was into sort of music, and he had all these things lined up for his retirement. And in the later years of his work became an inconvenience that was stopping him from retiring. And when he retired, he had a long, a happy. He got into ill health, sadly, and didn't enjoy it as much as he could have done. Which is, don't wait for your retirement to start living, really. But I saw a lot of people who did, and that scared me, because I thought, I'm enjoying this so much, I'll not notice time passing by, and I've got to get out and I've got to move on. And I pushed myself to move out and change jobs, and mostly that worked out really well. And then, as you're alluding to there, the last company I worked for, where I was only there for 3 years, with a very toxic environment, and given what I've said about, the problem is me. Yes, I, as I said earlier, for a long time I realized I really couldn't cope in the corporate environment. And at the time I would have said, I can't stand working for idiots who ask you to do things, and they don't even know why they're asking you to do them. And then you produce something that nobody ever looks at. Why am I doing this again? Well, because you've got to, because everybody's doing it. Well, what kind of a reason's that? So I realized that the problem wasn't that I was being managed by idiots. The problem was me, that, I just didn't fit in that environment, because other people were very happy there. One thing that interested me about that company when I joined was all the people I started meeting in the course of my job had the most amazing hobbies, and had things. There was one guy who used to restore and show off these old steam traction engines that you'll see at sort of country fairs. And rally driving. People have the most amazing hobbies. And I figured it was because the job was so soul destroying. They had to have something outside of work that was more than just stamp collecting and reading and stuff that people put on their CVs. So I think it was a toxic environment, because a lot of people there were just waiting. There were people that I knew there who were just waiting until they could take early retirement. And one of the things the company was doing to save money was it kept moving the early retirement date back. And there was a couple of guys I remember down in London who they used to always go around as a pair. They were inseparable. I don't think they ever did any work. All they did was wait. And they'd get within sight of their early retirement. The company would move it back another couple of years. And just waiting, that's the thing that's soul destroying. It's doing something that has no value, because you hope that if you do it for long enough, you'll then get something that is of value. But by the time that you get there, it's, to that point, it's too late to do anything about it. So I think those are the things that I learned, right at the very, very start of my career. And then you're right, certainly the voluntary redundancy, I thought was a great asset to me, because I thought I needed the cushion of having some money in the bank in order to make the jump, the leap to being self-employed. And people talk about it in those terms, like there's some big chasm that they've got to cross, because they're not going to have that monthly regular salary. But what they don't realize is the salary isn't the barrier. The money isn't the barrier. Time is the barrier. And when you're working a 9-to-5 job, or whatever hours you're working, that is time that you're not investing in yourself and your own business, if that's something that you're interested in doing, or re-educating yourself in order to change direction. That it's the time, because the money, there's lots of different ways you can get more money, but you can't get more time. And what I realized was the money was never a barrier, because I took my voluntary redundancy money and I thought, right, this will last me about 6 months. So if I can't start making a living in 6 months, then it isn't going to work, and I'll go back and find another job in the telecoms industry. I actually bought a car that consumed most of the money, and what was left still lasted a year. Because I started earning money self-employed before I'd even left my old job. And I think that's where the fear comes from, is I need a cushion of money to get me across this chasm because I'm not going to start getting paid straight away. Well, that's got nothing to do with the availability of money. That's to do with your belief that people are going to want to pay you. And when I was in a job where for 3 years people were telling me that I was worthless and, nothing I did had any value, when I got to the end, at that time thinking I've got to get out of this, I'd started to believe that was true. And so the obvious question was, well, who's going to pay me? It's going to take me a long time before somebody pays me. And that actually wasn't the case at all. So I think often the pressure that drives people to become self-employed, paradoxically, is the same pressure that causes them to devalue themselves and then doubt that they can do it. So it actually ends up being like an abusive relationship. You're in a relationship with somebody who tells you that, I'm the best you'll ever get and you'll never find anybody as good as me. And and managers in this company actually, and I'm not exaggerating, actually used to say to people, you'll never get a job anywhere else as good as this. Yeah, you might earn a bit of money if you go here and there, but then you'll have to really work for a living. Then you'll have to do that. You won't know what pressure is to. That's the language of an abusive relationship. And it wasn't because those managers, I think, genuinely thought that. I think it's because they were afraid as well. I think everybody there was afraid of, I don't like this, but I'm afraid that if I go somewhere else, it'll be worse. And a lot of people have been there for so long. And I think people being valued for their time, I think, people talk about feeling valued and feeling valuable. I think it's about time. Did I spend my time doing something that meant something to somebody, that made a difference to somebody, that counted? And I think that's why people get so excited and so keen on doing things like voluntary work, like people going on beaches and cleaning up plastic, because afterwards you can look at the beach and you can say, I made a difference. I did something. You can look at this bag of plastic you've picked up and you go, I did something that made a difference. And yeah, by tomorrow it's going to be right back the way it was again. But today I made a difference. And if we think in that way, we all make a huge difference together. We don't even have to be working together directly to do that, but it adds up.
There's so many different things to pick up on here. I mean, you've been talking about values most recently, and I agree. When you value your values, you then are valued for your work, essentially. So it's about being aware of your own sort of abilities and also your needs and your values. So competencies and skills and filters and values and beliefs and perceptions aside, ultimately it comes down to the sort of time-old quote of time and tide wait for no man. Time is of the essence, and how you spend your time is of the most importance. And you talk about the people who think that they've got time by setting aside that later in life, and yet it doesn't come. So what is your sort of biggest advocate or advice on this area?
Looking back, the only thing I ever wished for more of from my father particularly was time. It's the only thing I ever wanted more of. Didn't want any more money or stuff or whatever. And I think particularly parents often get into a trap of working so hard to give their kids a better life, not realizing it's them that gives their kids a better life, not the stuff and the money and the education. It's you and what you've spent a lifetime absorbing through your senses from the world, what you've spent a lifetime learning. It's your ability to share that and pass that on. You try and save your children from difficult lessons, from making mistakes. You can't, because everybody's got to make their own mistakes. It doesn't matter what you prepare people for, whether it's people you're training or your clients you're coaching or your kids that you're bringing up. Doesn't matter what you prepare people for. They will always find new and creative ways to screw their lives up, but they will get themselves out of that with your support, and whether that's as a friend or a parent or a coach or whatever it is. We can't stop people getting themselves into scrapes, but we can offer them a hand to pull themselves out of it, certainly. And I think in terms of the how to devote that time, how to spend your time, and people often say, well, I don't know what to do. Like I didn't know what to do, so I just did what I liked, what I enjoyed at the time. And this is the advice I always give people. And I've talked to business schools and my old school just a couple of weeks ago and talked about this, that I think the most important thing is to do what you enjoy doing. And that's for a very simple reason. I think, as I said earlier, people come out of school thinking, I've got to get a career that pays well. I've got to be an accountant or a doctor or a lawyer or a programmer in some obscure language that I can charge people a huge day rate for or whatever. But what happens is the job is never what you think it is. How much time does a teacher spend teaching? A couple of hours a day. The rest they spend doing timetables and meetings and talking to parents and just safeguarding and all kinds of stuff. So the job title isn't. We were talking about labels earlier. The label is misleading because that's only a tiny, tiny fraction of what that job actually entails. So people think, well, I'm going to be an accountant because I'll earn loads of money. Well, you don't actually spend an awful lot of time being an accountant. You spend a lot of the time doing all the other stuff you have to do in order to be able to do that thing. Same with athletes and sports players. They spend minutes on the pitch and hours and days and weeks training to be on that pitch. Because that's not the point where they do the job. That's the point where they get measured for doing the job. A lawyer spends most of their time not doing law work or not being in court or whatever it is, but that's the bit they get paid for. So that's the bit they get measured on. So that seems to be the important bit. So the advice is this: it's do what you enjoy, because if you enjoy it, you will naturally want to do more of it. And if you do more of something, you will naturally get better at it because you're doing it more often. And if you get better at it, people will pay you more to do it. So start with what you enjoy doing. And I think often at stages in people's career, they say, oh, but I don't know what I enjoy. Well, in that case, put yourself in a position where you can do as many different things as possible and see which one you like doing. I mean, it's so obvious, but so underrated as a way of finding your kind of direction. And I suppose the theme of the podcast, finding your purpose in life. Do what you like doing. But how will I know what I like doing? Do it and see if you like it. It's not complicated. And people take all these profiles and, have career coaching. Oh, I need to find out, and I've got to find out what I'm supposed to be doing and what's my purpose. Nobody knows. Do stuff. See if you take a basket weaving course. Did you like it? Yeah, it's all right. Okay, well, don't carry on doing that then. Take a creative writing course. Did you like that? Oh, I loved it. Then carry on doing that. Do what you like. You'll want to spend more time doing it. And if you lucky like me and are able to create a life and a business where, aside from tax returns, I can pretty much do everything because I like doing it, it means no day feels like work. I mean, there's, of course there is that distinction, going for a walk in the countryside isn't work. But while I'm going for a countryside and, walk in the countryside, I'm coming up with ideas and thinking of stuff that is work related or talking to my wife about stuff that is work related. So, but it feels like it makes a difference. If working I think that was the thing talking about the company, the last employer I had, there was nothing to talk about at the end of the day other than how bad things were. That's depressing. When your job comes into your home life because you've got to let off steam, because you've got to gripe about how they've treated you today. That's not good. But when you come home from work and say, oh, I did this today, and whoever you live with says, oh, wow, that's great. Then it's uplifting. It's valuing to have a conversation about stuff that makes you feel good about yourself, to tell stories about problems you've solved or ideas you came up with that resulted in somebody else saying to you, that's a good idea. Or, wow, you did a great job with that. That's, and to be able to bring that home and talk about that, in the evenings or the weekends, it amplifies that. So I think examine your working life and examine what you do at the boundaries of that. If the 5 minutes before you start work, you're dreading it and delaying it and putting it off, and in the evening after you finish work, your conversation at home is just all the things that have gone wrong and all the things you've hated that day. You change direction, and nobody's stopping you. Change direction anytime you want. The question I get asked the most is, how did I switch from working in the telecoms industry to doing what I do now? And there's two answers. There's a long, complicated answer, which is, it's not that different, and it's about systems and people and understanding complexity. Oh, yeah, people understand that. People understand the answer, and they like it because it's comforting, because it makes it sound like, it's a bit difficult, and it allows them to carry on telling their story about how what they're doing right now isn't what they really want to be doing. But that's not the truth. The truth was I just woke up one day and decided to do it. And there was never anything stopping me. And so if you're listening to this and thinking about making a change in direction in life, and you're coming up with excuses and reasons and things you've got to wait for, they're all lies. The truth is you can wake up one morning and decide to do it, and nobody will ever ask to see your certificate or your ID or anything. You say to somebody, I'm a whatever, and they will say, oh, okay, that's interesting. Or they'll say, oh, I don't know what that is, or whatever. But nobody will ever say, I don't believe you. You can change direction anytime you want. You just have to decide to do it. And having decided to do it, you've then got to figure out how to live with it. But, never forget how much support you've got around you, even though you might not think that. Never forget how many people are there with their hands out ready to pull you up when you need it.
Well, that seems like a great place to sort of wrap up today, Peter. And I just want to say thank you so much. I think I really enjoyed the sort of the gradual sort of journey that you've taken us on today. And it is understanding that, where people feel that they're being pigeonholed and niched right in their teens through to this sort of very sort of prescriptive life, actually to understand that it's not like that doesn't have to be how the world works, and that you have the choice to change your direction, to change opportunities, to take it where you want, but really focus on what you enjoy, which is the message you were sort of sharing there. So it's fantastic that you don't have to be trapped with fear and failings, and that you have opportunities within your life. So a fantastic conversation. Thank you. How would people get in contact with you, Peter?
You can visit my website, which is genius.coach. That really is a website. There's nothing missing from it. Genius.coach. And on the contact page there, you'll find links to all my social media profiles. I don't think there's many people around with the name Peter Freeth. So if you just look me up on LinkedIn as well, you'll find that. That would be the simplest way.
Fantastic. And I'm just going to share a story. Everybody on Zoom tends to have the bookcases behind you. And it was in our first conversation that you spotted a book on one of my top shelves and said, can you just have a look at that book? And I pulled it off my shelf, and lo and behold, it was your book. So it's impressive. It was really, I was actually a little bit sort of starstruck that I'd had this book and I hadn't connected the two. So you mentioned earlier in your podcast that you could be unaware of the impact you have on the world. Well, the impact you had on my world was that you took me into the world of NLP, and here we are now having a conversation sort of 2 years down the line. It's bizarre how the world sort of manifests and things happen like that. But yeah, it was great that you spotted something on my bookshelf that was your book. So thank you for that.
No, thank you. It was very exciting to see that. And I always love to look at people's bookshelves and stuff that they put in the backgrounds, because we've got to remember that, that's the environment you've created for yourself. So nothing is there by accident. Everything that's behind you right now is telling a story that you want to share with the world.
Yeah.
And there's a whole load of other stuff in your house which isn't behind you, like the vacuum cleaner and so on, because that's not a story you want to tell the world. So we all curate the story that we tell. And I think there's another message there about the fingerprints and the trail that we leave in the world behind us that we don't notice. I wrote a book, and then some years later you read it. But for both of us, that's a real-time conversation. I'm writing it as I'm talking to you in my now, and you're reading it as if you're talking to me in your now. And that book connects us through space and time. And more than books, everything that we do that leaves a physical imprint on the world connects people together. You go for a walk and you see a pile of stones. Somebody put those stones there and has, through space and time, communicated something with you. And I think if we're more aware of how we're doing that with each other, how we're connecting with each other and communicating with each other, I think we can feel a lot more, a stronger connection with the value that we bring to the world, because we can see ways that it does affect other people that we might never meet and might never even know about, but it still touches their lives. And ultimately, that's what we all want to do. We all want to be significant and valued. And more than anything else, I think we all want to be remembered.
Thank you for listening to the Focus on Why podcast. I'm Amy Rowlandson, and if you've enjoyed this episode, please leave me a 5-star Apple Podcast review. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram and Facebook, and become a member of my inspiring, uplifting and positive Focus on Why Facebook group. I help people to focus on their why with clarity, uniting their passion with their purpose with a plan to create the life they truly desire. If you would like me to help you focus on your why, then please book a free 20-minute coaching call via calendly.com/Amy Rowlandson. And if you haven't already, please sign up for the Friday Focus weekly newsletter via my website, amyrowlandson.com. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why.